Prima Prime from the Age of the Primes line is here. One of the original 13 created by Primus, he carries the Star Saber with the Matrix in its hilt to lead the 13 against the evil planet devouring Unicron. Jump right into this week's spotlight by using the timestamps below to check out everything from unique display and build ideas and a step-by-step transformation of the figure to comparisons with other figures throughout the various Transformers series, new and old, and of course a full review. This and more in this week's episode 55 of Heroic Nonsense. Let's go. From the legendary 13 Primes, another powerful warrior from the Age of the Primes line has arisen. Following my deep dive into Megatronus not too long ago, today we spotlight Prima Prime, the noble warrior of light with a backstory as mysterious as it is confusing across the Transformers multiverse. Let's break down his design, transformation, and place in this ever-evolving line of mythic power. But what role do you think Prima Prime should play in the future of the Transformers legacy? Now, I don't really remember much of this guy from his brief appearances across all the different Transformers comics, movies, and cartoon timelines, but what I do know is that his robot design was to some extent based off of his debut in the original Transformers G1 cartoon, The Five Faces of Darkness, mixed in with a sprinkle of some later toy and cinematic designs. What we get is an interesting take on this character that blends a ton of different aesthetics into one Prime that feels like it could have even come out of the War for Cybertron era. To be honest, when I first saw him announced, I wasn't that impressed. I ultimately decided to get him partly for the boys and partly because I ended up liking the design of the vehicle mode, which we'll explore a bit later in this episode. I had the same reaction when I first opened the box. I felt he was a bit lackluster, especially with such a drab color scheme. The grey on grey gives me a Bayverse feel, which I'm not a huge fan of, while also recognizing that to some, those designs were the best. However, as I played around with him for this review, he started to grow on me. I think partially because I started creating my own lore around him. My favorite part of his bot design has to be his head, which is pretty much taken straight out of the G1 cartoon, so no surprise there. I also just noticed as I'm putting this review together that his silver helmet looks a lot like G1 Megatron's. The chest with the thin blue highlights and somewhat organic feel is what gives me a bit of the Bayverse vibe, while the shoulder design and details lead me in the direction of War for Cybertron. Speaking of the chest, it opens up with a spot for a matrix, which is a nice little feature. As for which matrix this is, I'm not entirely sure. It has a blue tint to it and could potentially be a different or precursor matrix, something like the Origin Matrix, though it is, I believe, officially referred to as a Matrix of Leadership. As it is based off of the other matrices to date, any of them can fit inside his chest. I pulled three of the ones we have to highlight the similarities, these being from the Prima Prime figure, Earthrise Optimus, and Shattered Glass Rodimus. And while we're on the topic of accessories, Prima Prime comes with these three parts which ultimately all form together to form, you guessed it, the Star Saber, which is apparently the powerful sword wielded by Prima Prime in some of the different Transformers continuities, and has a design which appears to be similar to other designs of the Star Saber I've seen. It probably has to be my favorite sword design to date, with that clear blue plastic used for the blade giving it an almost ethereal feel embedded in that beautiful silver hilt. I like when swords or weapons can be attached to the figures when they're not wielding them, like Prima Primes can do here. It gives the bot a bit more realism for play and display. And it actually looks fairly cool from all different angles. Swords sheathed on the back always look good. I also really like that there aren't any empty spaces on the bot, giving it a bit more premium feel for a Voyager class, along with its size. Love how clean the back design is as well. And I especially like the way the back wheels fold into the legs, which not only looks great, but covers up an empty space that could have been ignored. He's also pretty posable, with his legs having a fair degree of articulation and a waist that rotates. Not only is he posable, but he does bounce really well, which means there's a lot of ways you can get creative with his display, I think this being one of my favorites. I really like this pose for displays because of that awesome sword with a clear blade that reflects some of the face behind it. Reminds me a bit of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. Of course, my review wouldn't be complete if I didn't showcase him walking and running. He is a bit tough to pose on one leg in this position though, but it gets the job done. Overall, totally liking this figure now with all the fun things you can do with him, the lore, and funny enough his look as well, even with the less exciting colors. Also, you may have noticed throughout, but his shoulder pads can be moved into different positions to give a more flared or subdued look, perfect for creating your own vision of him. While I am now a fan of the bot mode, it was the vehicle mode that originally got me to pre-order him, especially once I saw the size, or at least suspected it. and I'm happy to report that he does in fact transform into a pretty nicely sized Cybertronian truck / rover, kind of a mix between Wheeljack's G1 Cybertronian mode from the cartoon and War for Cybertron Ironhide. I really dig those wheels and that chunky bumper surrounding the driver's compartment. And to my surprise, he also has a second vehicle mode, with a Back to the Future type aesthetic where all 6 of his wheels can turn in to form thrusters to let him hover over the Cybertronian landscape. Now I had to place something under him here, in this case the Shattered Glass Rodimus Matrix with beams, to get him to display straight as the wheels in the back fold up way higher than the front ones. A bit of a design flaw, though I guess fine since this isn't his primary mode and more of a fun add-on I suspect. So let's start with the wheeled version, which just looks so cool. It definitely has that G1 Cybertronian feel, which I love, especially since I have a soft spot for the post-1986 movie G1 cartoons, which took place on Cybertron or other planets quite a bit. Gotta love that sloped down front, which reminds me a bit of the 80s robotics toys and cartoon, if anyone else remembers that. Every angle looks great on this guy, which makes sense since they could do whatever they wanted with his design since it isn't based off of any Earth-based vehicle. I even like the way the kneecaps form a type of spoiler on the back, giving them a dual purpose that looks good in both modes. The blue tint for the window is also a win, using the same plastic look and color as the sword. The back is probably the weakest part, but not by much, and who displays their vehicles from the back anyway? As for his second hover mode, it is definitely fun and a nice little bonus, but as I said earlier, it doesn't really sit flush and requires something underneath it to give it a more realistic hovering feel. I randomly used that matrix from earlier with the beams coming out of it, and it actually looks pretty good, giving it some sort of thruster effect. Now I'm really sorry in advance, but this may totally ruin this mode for you. But without something to prop up that back, it kinda looks like a pug sitting upright on a carpet while pulling itself forward with its front legs. Hence the very real need to put something under the body if you ever plan on displaying it this way. Okay, let's get that image out of our minds and back to some more interesting features, like the ability to place the sword, hilt, and matrix in a bunch of different configurations on the vehicle, which I also really appreciate, specifically when they don't look out of place. I'm not saying all these looks are perfect, but it does show you the multiple ways you can place these accessories on the vehicle mode, hidden or not. This last one is the official suggestion in the instructions and my least favorite, but it's definitely something you can do, at least as some type of energy sword battering ram. This mode hides the sword the best, though you do need to take it apart, with a hilt and matrix going underneath the body like so. There's barely any clearance though, so I suggest taking off the matrix before transforming him into his vehicle mode and placing it in his chest. After that, you should have enough clearance with just the hilt itself. Overall, a nice Cybertronian mode for Prima Prime that looks great and, as we'll see in a bit, can be combined with other Transformers from multiple different series for different types of displays. Now onto the transformation, which is pretty straightforward, I have to say. So let's flip this guy around a bit, and we're going to start with unhinging the back. And then we'll take the chest and rotate it 180 degrees, like this. And we'll just flip down this portion. And you can see the tabs over here, which tab into the shoulders once you remove the pads or get them out of the way. I like to do this first. I think the instructions say something else, but for me, this is the easiest and most efficient way to do it. So just push those into the tabs, like so. And now we will work on the arms by opening up the lower arm and flipping back the fist, and then you rotate the whole lower arm 180 degrees. We'll do the same on the other side, so open it up, and then we'll flip back the fist, and then rotate the whole lower arm 180 degrees, like this. And now we're going to push in the shoulder pads, just keep them out of the way. And open up the wheels so they just flip out. And if you do it halfway, you get that other hover mode. And then we'll just push the head back like that. Fits right in. And we're almost done this part. So we'll just kind of push it in. And then you can see a tab right here. It slots right in, so you push it in. and it's pretty snug, so it will hold. We'll do the same for the other side. You can see that little groove and you just slot it in, push everything together, you can hear it click, and that's pretty much the front portion of the vehicle. So now we'll move on to the legs, and we'll start by taking out the wheels. You just fold them out. Just leave them aside for now. And then we'll push back the feet and they tab into that little slot. And then you just slide one leg into the other. I like to slide it in and not just push it in. And I suggest bending it a little bit here at the waist and then pushing the legs right underneath that kind of tab that's sticking out from the front portion. And we're almost there now. We just have to lower the wheels and they kind of tab into a little groove underneath. One of mine isn't perfect, but I don't know if that's similar to anybody else's. You can see that tab right here. You gotta just push it in. Just click everything together, make sure everything's tight. There you go, you can hear the click. And there you have it. The vehicle mode for Prima Prime. Let's start this section off with the most obvious comparison, that of Prima Prime with some of the other primes we have to date. Alpha Trion from the A Heroes Born 2-pack, and of course Megatronus the Fallen. Since I'm still a big fan of this version of Alpha Trion, and since he has that G1 look, I think he fits in really well in this setup, and it's nice to see that they scale well. Let's go through some straight comparisons, and we'll have a bit more fun in the display and build ideas section with some Age of Primes comparisons using Megatronus and Air Raid. Other than height, do you guys think this line is cohesive? Or are the designs all over the place? I'm still on the fence, so reserving judgment for now. Some Studio Series 86 scale comparison, since Prima's design is partly inspired from the G1 cartoon, though I feel he looks a bit out of place here given the very smooth design of the Studio Series line versus Prima Prime's more organic feel. Which is why I think he fits a bit better with the War for Cybertron line. The designs have a more molded on feature which I think works better with this specific Age of the Prime figure's look. Rounding it out with another group I think he would fit in with, the G1 Autobots in their Cybertronian modes, which we'll get a better feel for once in their vehicle forms. Not to jump the gun on display ideas, but I don't know, these two figures just look like they fit in the same line even though years apart at this point. Turning to the vehicle modes, if you have Megatronus or have seen my review here, you know how big and impressive he is, so the fact that Prima Prime can hold his own size-wise is pretty cool. But it's this Cybertronian mode of buzzworthy wheeljack that immediately came to mind when I first saw Prima Prime's all mode. I think they look not half bad together now that I have them next to each other. What do you guys think? Again, it's with the War for Cybertron figures that I think Prima Prime looks best in both modes, especially next to Ironhide. They have that similar look, design, and molding that just seems to work. As for Alpha Trion, not bad. I just feel again that Alpha has that smoother G1 aesthetic from the cartoons, and I think a bit better paint applications that makes them stand apart a bit. However, I do like this team up and scale comparison using Orion pack from the same A Hero is Born 2-pack that Alpha Trion came from. This 100% gives me a G1 cartoon feel. Let's run through the roster again, this time from the front, and let me say I absolutely love that Megatronus figure. If you haven't gotten him yet, you have to go track one down. Yep, that just feels right, even from different angles. Instead of good old wheeljack, I brought in buzzworthy jazz, and again, I feel that conceptually they work, but design-wise, maybe not as much. Well, okay, brought wheeljack in again anyway. I actually forgot how big his vehicle mode is, even more surprising with his bot mode being fairly small. And Alpha Trion to close off this perspective. Cool together, but not perfect. I wanted to give you guys a few extra highlights for some scale comparisons, which I think do a good job of showcasing his size. As I'm sure you can see by now, Prima Prime is a good sized bot in both modes, and can definitely play across multiple different Transformers lines to match up with your own preferences. In the end, we'll still have to wait and see how all of these primes line up with one another. Before we get into some builds, I think it's worth taking a few more looks at Prima Prime on his own in some different poses, which in and of themselves are great display ideas. This being my favorite close-up shot since that clear blue on the sword just looks so icy up against his color scheme and allows you to see some of his face masked by that incredible design. I really do think this could be a great display idea and will be interesting to see how it can be used in conjunction with the other primes. Some matrix fun as well, in this case using the shattered glass matrix for a bit of color, though the main matrix with the bluish tones would look very cool as well. I feel that you can have a bunch of these guys with their chest open holding up the matrix. I may have to try that at some point. Optimus Prime, Prima Prime, Rodimus Prime, Ultra Magnus, am I forgetting any? Now this has to be my favorite. I don't really know where the story is going with this Age of the Primes line, or if we'll ever really know, but I suspect this is probably lore accurate, or at least could be a strong possibility. I like the idea of creating dynamic looking displays, so this one with Alpha Trion running towards Prima as Megatronus grabs him by the neck and prepares to blast him is right up my alley. I always enjoy pulling out my Vector Sigma accessory from the A Heroes Born 2-pack where I can and when it works, which I think it does with these guys, especially if you're going for the G1 cartoon feel. As we get more of the primes in, I think it could be cool to recreate the Pantheon image on the side of the packages. Looks a bit empty now, but interested in seeing how it will look with more of the primes lined up next to each other. Once I opened up Prima Prime, this setup immediately came to mind, and boy does it work. I actually think this is the perfect display combo, and I love the lore for both characters. So by taking a bit of artistic freedom, you can create some really cool timelines here with your display ideas. I stopped here for now with Senator Shockwave, but I could have kept on going with Senator Ratbat, Minor Megatron, even with figures like Decepticon Impactor. If you want to see some good displays using Minor Megatron, check out my review of Age of the Primes Megatronus, there are a bunch in there. Vehicle wise, these two also look great together. Let me know in the comments section if you think I'm right on the money with this, at least visually. Even having Orion packs join the mix looks good, and adds a bit of color. Something I liked about reviewing Prima Prime was that I was able to pull out a bunch of Transformers from different lines. Here, for example, I felt rather than using Studio Series 86 Cup, I could instead use Headmaster Cup, which I think actually looks better in my mind in this setup. I may now actually have a way to fit these figures from older lines back into my displays. While I may have thought earlier that Alpha Trion and Prima didn't look the best together, I think throwing Megatronus into the mix balances them out a bit better. And there are plenty of ways to use the primes we have so far. While I did use again a bit of movie magic on that previous shot with Alpha Trion, you can recreate these looks by discreetly placing something underneath the vehicles to give them this hover mode feel without having a standard type stand sticking out. Anything around the house could work. I use for example a small box and the backpack of a G.I. Joe classified Crimson Guard. Something I also like to do is create teams for my displays, and I feel that Prima Prime would have guards that could look like these, which use the War for Cybertron, Ironhide, and Ratchet mold. I also thought this might be a cool setup, with Ferric, who's not a main character, being a personal guard for Prima. I tried to expand on that concept with some other lesser known figures like Refractor here, but not every idea is a winner. Now I know a lot of people still like or even prefer Earthrise Optimus as compared to Studio Series 86 Optimus. As for which Optimus Prime looks best with Prima Prime, here's War for Cybertron Optimus again versus Studio Series 86 Optimus. Who do you think wins? And finally, based off of the lore from the G1 cartoon continuity, a fun display recreating or better yet expanding on that storyline. Check out the 5 Faces of Death episode 4 cartoon and you'll see why I place Wreck-Gar's wheel/shield on Prima Prime's arm. I only started noticing with the Age of the Primes aerial bots, but the packages now have both modes featured on the front panel, which I really like. And this one for Prima Prime looks fantastic, very Knights of Old looking. The art also reminds me of something, but can't put my finger on it for the moment. Side panel has a blown up picture from the front of Prima Prime in bot mode, while the back continues to take the less is better approach, with a few callouts to some of the figure's features. The other side panel shows the same 3 primes as the ones on Slingshot's side panel, that being Prima Prime, Vector Prime, and I believe Alpha Trion. Well, that brings us to the end of this week's Spotlight, where we got to revisit a ton of Transformers from across all the recent lines. Hope you enjoyed this side trip down memory lane, as well as the entire review of Prima Prime and some of the other recent Transformers Age of the Primes releases, and we'll see you all back here next episode. And remember, it's all such heroic nonsense in the end.
Transform!